Thanks, Ray. Good evening, fellow members and guests. What if I asked you, what in your opinion is the most important skill to be an effective leader? Would love to hear from the audience. Just shout it out. What do you think in your mind makes a really effective leader? One word. Don't be shy.
Empathy. Empathy.
Charisma.
Empathy, charisma,
Vision.
vision,
Listening.
Confidence.
Involvement.
Listening.
Excellent. Good stuff. All great qualities, and you're all right. All of these skills are important. There's probably more, and maybe some of them could be more important at different times. Somebody just said self-awareness, absolutely. Confidence. Well, my attention was called to one particular skill. However, when I conducted a 360-degree feedback survey, and the point of that survey was to get feedback from different people and different vantage points, people that I reported into, peers, and people that reported into me as well. And when they were asked, what's the one big thing that Gabe should focus on to improve as a leader, the answer was absolutely clear. It was almost as if they've gotten in one room and answered the question collectively. And the answer was, be more present. Be more present. In fact, here are some direct quotes. Sometimes when talking with him, I can tell he's thinking about other things, calls, texts, emails, etc. that are coming in. Distant when not in the community, easily distracted by other things he has to do. When here, not fully connected, the phone never stops ringing, which is true. When having a conversation with him, sometimes there's a long pause and not sure if the conversation is over. Sometimes it's a little awkward. And then the last quote, direct quote, was sometimes half listened. When hearing the feedback, I had a number of reactions. The first one was disbelief, a little bit of denial in there. How come no one had brought this to my attention before? How come nobody called me out on it? Could it be that maybe people were wrong? Could it be that maybe they misinterpreted different things? My second reaction then turned to concern. Was I really not that present? When? And again, why had no one thought to call me out on it? And then I started to think of a few situations where I could have been perhaps a little bit more, probably more present. Maybe I had been multitasking. That concern turned into acceptance. Yeah, this is probably an area I need to work on. I started auditing my behavior, and turns out I actually felt an endorphin rush when multitasking. I felt like I was getting more stuff done. And then my last form of reaction was actually embarrassment. I wondered how many people felt like I hadn't given them the proper amount of attention because it looked like I had been distracted by other things. Then I started to think, how could I be so rude? I was embarrassed. What did people think of me? And the worst part was I didn't know where it was coming from because it was anonymous, but it was 360 degree, and it was a pretty obvious collective voice. Well, as a mentor of mine used to say, we are where we are. And I was truly disappointed, but I had two takeaways, two things. First, one of the points of the exercise is to get, among other things, constructive feedback. So check. After all, I couldn't really be upset that I had received something that I had asked for. The second takeaway is what a blessing, right? Now that I had received the feedback, I could actually work on it. I mean, this was the point of the exercise. And rather than stick in my head in the sand and diminish it, and a small part of me wanted to say, I'm not sure I agree, I could say, hey, there's something here, and what's more, I could even maybe own up to it and tell people that I was working on it and maybe repair some of the relationships that it appeared I had maybe damaged through my lack of presence. Kind of like you said, I heard, I'm working on it. So first I had to understand the issue. So I did an audit of my behavior, which is just a fancy way of saying I started paying attention to what I was doing. Paying attention to the behaviors. And at the time we weren't on Zoom. This was a couple roles ago, pre-pandemic, but we did have a lot of conference calls. And my role in particular called for, I remember Mondays and Fridays were almost all filled with conference calls. And I noticed it. There wasn't video, so I would get on the call and I'd start emailing. I would work on other things. I would even play games on my phone. And the scary part was I'd become really good at adding in meaningless subtext that made it look like I was paying attention. For example, I would say things like, yeah, no, I think that's right. What does that even mean? Yeah, no, I think that's right. When people ask me what I thought, something else I said, what do we think is a good next step? Translation, I'm trying to make it seem like I'm paying attention, but in reality, I've missed the last few minutes. So let's focus on where we're moving from here. And then the last thing is when I couldn't really come up with anything, and I clearly hadn't been putting attention, I would say, my apologies, I'd been multitasking, haha. Could someone please repeat that? And frankly, I copied that from someone else, so I can't even take credit for that one. Wow. So I had a real problem, right? And while I didn't do it on every call, it was really easy for me to justify, when in reality, it was actually being selfish and rude, right? But again, we are where we are. So thus far, I had identified that one, the feedback was valid, it was accurate. And two, I had to figure something out to break this pattern of behavior. So being present is something that I clearly struggled with, particularly on conference calls. So I came up with a few techniques to help me stay present. And again, I think that more than half the battle is just being mindful of the fact that you're doing this. Then you can address it. So here's some of the tricks that I use, and you may find them helpful. For one, I started booking meetings for slightly less time than I thought that I would need. Because what I found was that if meetings dragged on, I found myself just running out of steam. And I see that now in particular, where everything's on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Shorter meetings, I think for me, help me focus and force me to, depending on what the role is in the meeting, to stay on task, because time's going to run out if we delay that. That's number one. Number two, I found that being an active participant really helped me stay focused. So sometimes I'm leading the meeting, sometimes I'm not, sometimes I'm really just there tangentially. And it can be very easy to make the excuse, oh, I'm going to go off camera even now and go work on something. But I really force myself to be an active participant, and that does help me stay focused. And then number three was I started paying attention to other people that weren't paying attention. And I realized it's pretty rude, right? It's easy to tell. And I decided I didn't want to be that person. So I really try to think of that. So now some of these techniques have worked. I would not say that I'm perfect, but better. Fast forward to today, everyone is on Zoom or FaceTime or Microsoft Teams, Google Meet. And it turns out that you can actually adapt your skills to this phase that we're in. For example, number one, keep the video on during meetings. It's a good way to stay accountable. It's hard to multitask when you're on camera. Number two, multitasking is actually a fallacy. We actually suck at it. We think we're good at it. Maybe we're good at chewing gum and walking at the same time, but when it comes to actual complicated, interesting tasks, we're actually terrible at it. So we think we're doing more, but we're actually doing less, and we're doing it poorly. Another technique that I use now is closing the windows, closing Slack, closing, putting a phone away, closing email if need be, any sort of alerts on the phone. And then just really focusing on being present. Someone once told me that some of the best leaders make them feel like the listener is the only person in the room. How special is that? I want it to be that person. Now, there is this perception that CEOs, leaders, they tend to be aloof, that they have short attention spans, ADD even, and somehow people are differential to it, and that just perpetuates that behavior. But the reality is that it's important to connect, and it's important to be present. People want to feel respected. And for me, being present is something that I will always have to continually work on. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert now, but that 360-degree evaluation was so powerful in identifying that. And I'll never forget it because it was very visceral. I felt the feedback. And afterwards, I went back to folks and said, you guys said this, I'm working on it. I want to let you know that I hear you. So I would recommend that anybody that's in any leadership position, which is really any position, if you think about it, you can be a leader, conduct this 360-degree survey. It worked a lot for me. I recommend it. It can help you identify weaknesses. And in particular, when it's anonymous, you can get really valuable feedback to get better. Thank you.